Hey there, seventh graders. How you doing? This is Mr. Garnett Cook. I hope you've all had a good week. We are entering the second to last week of our unit on ancient Greece, after which we'll be shifting our attention to Rome. This week's work is going to focus on the Peloponnesian War. And you'll notice on the screen here, I have the subheading Athens, Sparta, and the end of the city-states. Now, that is somewhat dramatic language there, but there's a lot of truth to it because the Peloponnesian War ends in 404 BCE. And within 50 years, we really see the end of Greece as a place of independent city-states. We'll get into that a little bit next week. This week, we focus on the Peloponnesian War, and my screencast today is primarily for the purpose of bridging the gap between what you learned about last week, which was the rise of Athens and Sparta and the Persian Wars, bridging the gap to the Peloponnesian War. I want to start with a couple of quotes, getting back to a little bit of what we learned about last week, and really focusing on the differences between Athens and Sparta. And I have a couple of quotes here I'm going to read. One is from a Roman historian named Plutarch. The other is from the history of the Peloponnesian War, written by a Greek historian named Thucydides, but he's quoting an Athenian statesman named Pericles, and I'll get to that in a second. Let me read the first quote. This is Plutarch describing Sparta. Plutarch said, he's talking about the training of Spartan kids, to become soldiers. He says, they were enrolled in certain companies where they all lived under the same order and discipline, doing their exercises and taking play together. Of these, he who showed the most conduct and courage was made captain. They obeyed his orders and underwent patiently whatever punishment he inflicted, so that the whole course of their education was one of continued exercise of a ready and perfect obedience. He's highlighting here what we've come to believe is true about Spartan society and the kind of society they wanted to create, one in which Spartans thought of themselves as part of a single unit. Their loyalty was the city-state, obedience, devotion to the city-state in defense of it, being above everything else. You see this reflected here in Plutarch's description of the training of Spartan soldiers. The second quote comes from, it's a famous speech by Pericles called the Funeral Oration. After the first year of the Peloponnesian War, Pericles, according to the historian Thucydides, gave this speech to really try to inspire the Athenians to continue to fight. And this is a word for word Thucydides' description of what Pericles said. So Pericles supposedly says about Athens, he says, our form does not imitate the laws of neighboring states. On the contrary, we are rather a model to others. Our form of government is called a democracy because its administration is in the hands not of a few, but of the whole people. In the settling of private disputes, everyone is equal before the law. No man is kept out of public office by the obscurity of his social standing because of his poverty, as long as he wishes to be of service to the state. Now, there are some things about this that are not historically accurate. We won't talk about that now. But you'll notice here in this funeral oration from Pericles that he is also describing the ideal characteristics of an Athenian, also being devotion to the state. But unlike the Spartans, where devotion was reflected in one's service in the military, here it's service in government, participation in democracy. So you have in both of these quotes emphasis on devotion to or service to the state, the city-state, but for different reasons and through different means. So it really gets to the important differences between Athens and Sparta. Peloponnesian Wars. It's wars because technically there were two different Peloponnesian Wars, although the Second Peloponnesian War, fought from 431 to 404 BCE, is often simply referred to as the Peloponnesian War because it really was the main war. But the Peloponnesian Wars were fought over the course of a half century. And I want to start with the background, and we have to start with the Persian Wars. Because you could argue if there had been no Persian Wars, there would have been no Peloponnesian War. There is a link between the two wars. The link has to do with Greece's victory over the Persians and the really arrival of Athens and Sparta as the most powerful city-states in the Greek world. And this will lead to conflict between the two city-states. There's some important differences we've already mentioned between them. But during the years between the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian War, Sparta grew increasingly concerned over Athens' growing power. Athens, after the Persian Wars, really looked to expand its influence. You can see in this map down here, the area shaded in kind of a light brown. These are territories that Athens controlled in the years between the Persian Wars and the Peloponnesian War. So they were building themselves a little empire, stretching across the Aegean Sea from Athens down to Crete, across, encompassing many of the islands, and then even along the western coast of Turkey, which was the borderland of the Persian Empire. This would be what would contribute to the lead up to the war, because what's going to happen is Athens is going to become very powerful. And as Athens becomes more powerful, and they're going to really upset what is called the balance of power among the city-states. And as they expand across the Aegean, you're going to start to see Athens build a real powerful naval empire. Their navy is going to become the most powerful in the Eastern Mediterranean. And this is in large part because of Pericles, who's this famous statesman who is really credited with, the growth of what is called the Athenian Empire. Because of Athens' growing power, there was pressure on Sparta to oppose Athens. Sparta was really the only other city-state in the Greek world that had the military muscle to oppose Athens. And this is going to set the stage for the growing conflict between the two sides. Athens is going to be threatening Sparta's allies. One of the most important allies is right here. If you look really close where I'm, circling with my cursor here, the city of Corinth, which is on this little strip of land, this isthmus that connects what is known as the Peloponnesus to the rest of mainland Greece. It was a strategically very important city-state. They had conflict with Athens, and they were turning to Sparta for help. This is going to lead to the forming of two rival alliances, two groups of city-states that are going to be against one another. One is known as the Delian League, which is led by Athens, and the other, the Peloponnesian League, led by Sparta. And this is where we get the name Peloponnesian War. The war fought between these two rival alliances. Peloponnesian War, the main one is fought between 431 and 404 BCE. This week, in a reading and a video, you'll learn a little bit more about the First Peloponnesian War, which was a minor conflict, and also this main conflict that is fought between these 2 years. The Peloponnesian War is fought over these 27 years and has three main phases to it that you're going to be learning about. First of all, I just want to say really quickly, the main source we have for the Peloponnesian War, in fact, it's really the only substantial source we have, is the Greek historian Thucydides, who wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War. Almost every version of this war that you'll read in a textbook is based on Thucydides. It does raise some questions, how much of it is accurate. Thucydides himself was involved in the war, so he is a first-hand eyewitness. So he does have that going for him. He was also Athenian, and it's important to recognize that. He's telling the story of the war from an Athenian point of view. So that's important if you're thinking about sort of perspective and bias and things like that. That's important to keep in mind. There are three main phases to the war. Phase one is a Spartan invasion of Attica, which was the region in which Athens was located. There will be an Athenian counterattack. That will lead to a brief period of peace or attempted peace between Athens and Sparta. Phase two is an Athenian expedition to Syracuse, which is over here on the island of Sicily. If you'll notice over here, it's connected to the boot of Italy. You'll learn this week why Athens is headed to Syracuse. Syracuse is on the eastern coast of Sicily over here. What are they doing going all the way over there? But it's a really a disastrous expedition by Athens, and it will lead to their eventual weakening. And phase three of the Peloponnesian War is when the Persians get involved. The Persian Empire doesn't disappear. They're still out there, still very powerful. They're going to inject themselves into this war on the side of Sparta. They're looking to get back at Athens for all the territory Athens has taken away from them. They're going to supply Sparta with a navy. That Sparta will use that to basically level the playing field and get the advantage over Athens. and it will pave the way for Sparta's eventual victory in the Peloponnesian War. But going back to what I said at the beginning of the podcast, even though Sparta wins the Peloponnesian War, both Athens and Sparta come out of the war incredibly weakened. And it's that they will never, ever regain the power they had before the war. This will pave the way for the eventual invasion of mainland Greece from this group of people named the Macedonians, led by a guy named Philip II. He will eventually be replaced by his son, Alexander, who will famously be known in history books as Alexander the Great. And we'll be learning about him next week. Look on Canvas for your various assignments this week. I hope you enjoyed learning about the Peloponnesian War. Shoot me an email if you have any questions. Have a good week, 7th grade. Bye.